Marcus had seen too much of the world to be dazzled by its noise. His youth had been consumed by the long shadow of military service. From deserts that scorched the skin to cities broken by conflict, his life had been dictated by orders, missions, and survival. The army had molded him into a man of unflinching routine. It taught him to rise before dawn, march until his legs screamed, and endure nights filled with explosions instead of dreams. For almost 2 decades, he measured time not by calendars but by deployments. The memories he carried were not the kind one could share casually over a pint. He remembered laughter at dusk that dissolved into silence the following dawn, when the friend who laughed was gone forever. He remembered carrying a comrade's body under fire, every step promising his own end, yet somehow surviving. He remembered the solemn weight of folded flags handed to families who could barely stand through their grief. Marcus collected medals, yes, but they felt like iron chains, reminders of loss rather than triumph. When his service ended, he slipped back into civilian life like a man returning from exile. There was no celebration, just a quiet yearning to live where the loudest sound at night was the creak of a fence or the call of an owl. He longed for ordinary mornings filled with birdsong instead of orders barked through radios. He craved the chance to raise his flag each day not as a signal of battle but as a gesture of memory. Peace was all he wanted, and he sought it with the determination of someone who had seen its opposite. Brookside Lane offered that dream. The street looked like it belonged on a postcard. Neat houses lined up in gentle symmetry, each with its own garden clipped short, driveways polished clean, and fences painted every spring. Children drew hopscotch squares with chalk, neighbors nodded politely as they collected the post, and dogs barked at delivery vans before wagging their tails. The air was often laced with the scent of barbecues on weekends, and lawns gleamed under sprinklers in the summer sun. To Marcus, who had slept under broken roofs and open skies, this suburb was not dull, it was heaven. He bought a modest 2-bedroom house near the middle of the lane. It was not large, but it was enough. Enough to rest, enough to belong. Before unpacking boxes, before arranging his bed, Marcus did one thing. He planted a flagpole in the center of his garden. Onto it, he raised the flag that had traveled with him across continents, through storms of bullets and stretches of desert. As it lifted into the breeze, he saluted once, an old instinct, and lowered his hand. This was not decoration. It was memory stitched in cloth, sacrifice woven into colors. Beside the pole, he placed a small insignia from his unit. It was discreet, barely noticeable unless one stepped close. But for Marcus, it was essential. It tethered him to the men who had not returned, to promises whispered in foxholes, to the part of himself that would always remain in uniform. For a brief time, he thought the neighborhood would accept it. A few neighbors smiled. One man gave a nod that lingered a second longer than courtesy. Some ignored it altogether, and Marcus took comfort in that too. But peace, as he had learned many times before, was never permanent. Across the street lived Karen Rowland. In her late 40s, with sharp features and sharper eyes, she had ruled Brookside Lane for over a decade as president of the Homeowners Association. Karen moved with the precision of someone on patrol. Her clipboard was never out of reach, its surface covered with notes, regulations, and reminders of fines she had issued. To her, the HOA handbook was scripture. Rules were not guidelines, but commandments, and she enforced them with the zeal of a warden. Neighbors did not admire Karen. They endured her. They smiled quickly when she passed, avoided her gaze, and saved their sighs for when she was gone. But no one challenged her. She held power because she demanded it, and everyone bent to avoid her wrath. When Karen noticed Marcus's flag, she didn't see reverence, she saw rebellion. Someone had introduced something into her pristine street without her blessing. To Karen, that was an unforgivable crime. The first letter arrived 3 days later. Marcus found it slipped beneath his door, stamped with the HOA logo. The words were short, impersonal, and cold. Unauthorized displays have been observed on your property. Please remove them immediately to avoid fines and disciplinary action. Marcus read it slowly. He glanced out at the flag, catching the sunlight as it swayed. He folded the letter carefully, placed it in a drawer, and left the flag untouched. 2 days after that, Karen herself came. Marcus was mowing his lawn, the machine buzzing steadily, when he saw who marching towards him. She stopped in front of the flag, pointed at it with her pen, and declared, "This has to come down." Marcus turned off the mower, pulled off his gloves, and asked, "Why?" "It's against the rules," she snapped. "I've read the handbook," Marcus replied calmly. "It doesn't mention flags." "It mentions unauthorized decorations," Karen said, lips curling. "And I haven't authorized this." Marcus met her gaze evenly. "With respect, ma'am, the flag stays." Karen froze. For the first time in years, someone had not apologized, not rushed to obey, not cowered under her authority. She spun on her heel and stalked away, fury stiffening every step. This was not retreat. It was the start of a battle. The next week brought more letters, each citing different clauses, each threatening new fines. Marcus read them, folded them, and placed them with the first. His drawer began to fill. Karen lingered outside his house, eyes narrowed at the flag, as if she could force it down by sheer will. She whispered to neighbors about chaos and slippery slopes, but her whispers did not travel as they once had. A video of her confrontation with Marcus had begun to spread. Phones had captured it. The neighbors saw Marcus's calm against her rage, his measured tone against her shrillness. The image spoke louder than her letters. Quietly, support stirred. A pie appeared on Marcus's porch, left without a note. A neighbor paused mid-walk to say, "Good for you." Another offered a thumbs up. These were not declarations, but they were signs. Signs that people had begun to see through Karen's iron mask. Karen, sensing her grip loosening, tightened it further. She pinned an official notice to the community board. "This homeowner refuses to comply with repeated requests. Such behavior endangers the harmony and standards of our neighborhood." But instead of fear, her words inspired eye rolls. Neighbors read them and shook their heads. Some muttered that she had finally gone too far. The power she wielded so confidently was showing cracks. Then came the night when the quiet battle turned into open war. It was a warm evening. Families sat in gardens, the smell of grilled food hanging in the air. Children laughed, chasing each other across the pavement. Marcus was trimming his hedge when Karen stormed across the street, clipboard clutched like a sword. She pointed at the flag and shouted, "Take it down now. Enough is enough. This is against the rules and I will not allow it." The street froze. Children stopped mid-laugh. Parents looked up from their meals. Phones lifted, recording. Marcus set down his trimmer, wiped his hands slowly, and faced her. His voice was low, but carried across the still air. "Ma'am, that isn't just cloth. It's memory. It's sacrifice. To take it down would dishonor every man who never came home, and I will not do that." Murmurs swept the crowd. Someone whispered, "He's right." Another muttered, "She's lost it this time." Karen's face burned red. "Do you think you're special just because you were in the army?" Marcus shook his head. "No, I'm not special. But what they gave was, and I won't dishonor it." The murmurs became applause, soft at first, then stronger, until clapping echoed along Brookside Lane. Karen trembled with rage, her clipboard rattling. "You'll regret this," she shrieked, storming back across the street. That night, Brookside Lane buzzed with talk. Videos of the confrontation raced through chat groups. Marcus's calm words were replayed again and again. Karen's fury, standing beside them like a shadow. For the first time in years, her power looked brittle. Marcus sat on his porch beneath the flag, expression unreadable. He did not smile, did not celebrate. He had seen too many battles to mistake one stand for victory. In his bones, he knew This was only the beginning. In the quiet town of Brookside Lane, a storm brewed beneath the surface of neat hedges and freshly painted fences. Karen Rowland, the self-appointed guardian of order, had long reveled in her role as the unwavering head of the Homeowners Association. Each sunrise, she donned her armor of authority, clipboard in hand, ready to wield her power over the tranquil neighborhood. But on a fateful evening, the unyielding Marcus had dared to defy her. His calm demeanor, a stark contrast to Karen's stormy temperament. That night, as shadows lengthened and stars pierced the darkened sky, Karen wrestled with the weight of her frustration. The confrontation replayed in her mind, an echo of defiance that gnawed at her insides. She had always found solace in control, but Marcus had infiltrated her carefully constructed world. His tranquil spirit, a quiet rebellion she couldn't shake off. The following morning dawned like a canvas ready for her brush. Karen sat at her kitchen table, the light filtering through the window, illuminating her determined expression. Her clipboard, a steadfast companion, rested before her as she composed a new notice, each word sharper than the last, slicing through the air like a blade. It read, "Continued non-compliance will result in fines and potential legal action. The integrity of Brookside Lane depends on adherence to regulations. You are jeopardizing the harmony of this community." With a calculated precision, she printed multiple copies, pinning them like trophies, one to Marcus's door and another on the community notice board. Each notice was a clarion call to the neighborhood, an attempt to paint Marcus not as a man honoring his past, but as a threat to their idyllic way of life. However, the day unfolded differently than she hoped. Marcus found her notice fluttering against his door, the morning breeze whispering a quiet challenge. He read it slowly, then folded it neatly, tucking it away with other reminders of her futile attempts to control him. His silence was not defeat. It was the patience of a man who understood that true strength often lay in quiet resolve. Around him, a low hum of discontent began to ripple through Brookside Lane. Neighbors exchanged furtive glances, some frowning at Karen's notices, while others regarded Marcus with newfound sympathy. The video of their confrontation spread like wildfire, igniting discussions in kitchens and living rooms, and for the first time, the community began to question Karen's reign. Sensing the shift, Karen pressed harder. She sent emails, phoned council offices, and spoke with clipped authority at the local cafe, each word designed to tighten her grip. "If he gets away with it," she intoned, loudly enough for prying ears, "next it'll be broken fences, tacky lights, chaos. The whole neighborhood will look like a circus." Yet as she spoke, she noticed a subtle resistance. A roll of eyes here, a shared glance there, that unsettled her more than she cared to admit. 3 days later, the Homeowners Association called a meeting. The community hall, typically empty, brimmed with curious faces, eager for the spectacle that had unfolded. Marcus arrived quietly, his modest appearance a stark contrast to Karen's commanding presence. She strode in, clipboard held high like a judge prepared to deliver a verdict she was certain would be in her favor. With fervor, Karen launched into her speech, her voice echoing as she painted Marcus as a villain. "This community thrives on order," she declared, her authority firm. But just as she reached the climax of her tirade, Marcus stood. He surveyed the room, his gaze steady, and spoke with a calmness that disarmed. "With respect, I've read your handbook. It says nothing about flags. That cloth you call a display? To me it is memory, blood, and loss. To remove it would be to dishonor them, and I will not do that." A profound silence fell over the hall, the weight of his words sinking in. From the back, a voice broke the tension. "He's right." Murmurs of agreement spread, enveloping Karen's confidence in a shroud of doubt. Panic flickered across her face as she tried to regain control. "If we do not enforce rules, we crumble." But Marcus's voice cut through, resolute and unwavering. "Communities do not crumble from kindness, ma'am. They crumble from fear." The room vibrated with the truth of his words, ripples of support flowing through the crowd. Karen's authority may not have shattered, but it had cracked. and everyone saw it. The meeting ended in chaos, Karen retreating with her pride wounded, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. Meanwhile, Marcus lingered, offering nods of gratitude to those who supported him, leaving without fanfare. From that night forward, Brookside Lane changed. Children waved at Marcus. A neighbor left biscuits on his porch with quiet thanks. A note appeared on his door. "You've given us courage." But Karen was not one to retreat easily. She doubled down, filing complaints, phoning legal contacts, her threats growing bolder. Yet with each attempt, she felt her power slip further away, her neighbors meeting her gaze with defiance instead of fear. Finally, the unthinkable announcement came. An emergency vote to suspend her as president. The very people she had controlled now stood on the precipice of change, fueled by a quiet but powerful courage ignited by one man's defiance. In that moment, Brookside Lane became more than just a street. It became a community, united not by fear, but by the strength of their voices, once silenced, now rising in harmony. Karen had never realized how fragile her hold on Brookside Lane was until the week after the contentious meeting. For more than a decade, she had worn her authority like a comfortable coat, worn daily without question. But now it felt awkwardly constricting. Too tight in some places and too loose in others, the seams beginning to fray as she walked the familiar pavement with her clipboard pressed tightly against her chest, as if it would still command respect. Conversations that used to hush in her presence now flared with life. People glanced at her instead of averting their eyes. Some even offered thin smiles that seemed to ask, "What will you do now?" In the dim light of her home, Karen did what any seasoned leader would do. She doubled down. Night enveloped her as she pored over council bylaws and rummaged through dusty PDFs, hunting for anything she could twist into an edict. She penned letters with a tone sharp enough to slice through the air and filled her voicemail with official jargon designed to rattle the nerves of clerks. By dawn, she had convinced herself that the neighborhood would thank her when order was restored, when the street returned to the clean, compliant quiet she adored. Across the lane, Marcus embraced his morning rituals. He woke early, the scent of freshly brewed tea curling in the air, and stepped outside to raise the flag, its fabric billowing gently in the crisp morning breeze. For a fleeting moment, the world felt grounded. He trimmed the hedges with care, swept the porch, and exchanged nods with the postman. But when he spotted a new, unsettling notice pinned to his door, a more severe threat of fines, vague allusions to legal action, he only read it quietly and tucked it away with the others. His drawer was nearly full now, a neat stack of paper whispering truths without the need for a single spoken word. Yet silence was never complete. It thrummed with soft murmurs. As Marcus strolled across the lane for milk, neighbors whispered, "We saw the video." Another, returning from a morning jog, commented, "You kept your cool. Most wouldn't." A child playfully saluted him. His mother blushed, tugging her son's hand, but a smile of gratitude slipped through. Marcus offered the same response he always did, a courteous nod and a gentle "thank you." From her window, Karen watched these exchanges, a growing resentment bubbling within her. The street felt like it was slipping away, tilting towards Marcus and the warmth he exuded. She refused to become the villain of the place she had maintained in order for so long. If the handbook wavered, she would become the handbook. With resolve, one brittle evening, she strode across the pavement, not stopping at the boundary, but stepping boldly into Marcus's garden, reaching for the halyard as if it were a loose thread on a fraying fabric. Her fingers grasped it, only to freeze as a heavy stillness enveloped the air, a hush deeper than the usual suburban quiet, the kind that precedes a storm. Doors creaked open, curtains fluttered, the street watched. Marcus set his mug down, his movements unhurried, a calmness radiating from him that felt like an anchor. "Step away from it," he stated, not as a demand, but a simple, undeniable truth. "You think a flag is above the rules?" Karen spat, her eyes ablaze with fury. "You think you are? I think memory is," Marcus replied evenly, And I believe everyone on this street understands the difference between rules that foster kindness and rules that breed fear. Phones had already sprung to life, capturing the moment. Karen saw her reflection in the black screens, her hand grasping the rope, her jaw set, and imagined how this imagery would ripple through group chats. The president grappling with a symbol that now seemed larger than her. Her fingers slackened, the halyard slipping from her grip, and she turned on her heel, the clipboard clattering against her side like a reprimand as she retreated. By nightfall, the clip had spread beyond the first confrontation. The captions were unkind. Clipboard queen, unseated by a rope. She attempted to suppress it, tried to erase the mockery, but found sleep elusive. The following morning, Marcus discovered a note resting on his porch, written in delicate cursive. "My husband's name is on a memorial. Thank you for remembering." There was no signature. He folded the paper with the same tenderness he had shown when stashing away the threats, placing it on top of a book he was reading, keeping it close. Gradually, Brookside Lane's spirit began to change. The couple 3 doors down, who had kept their eyes cast down, waved first. The elderly man with the trembling hedge finally asked Marcus for help with his trimmer. Marcus obliged without hesitation, no grand speeches necessary. A teenager, usually slumped with indifference, straightened when he passed the flag, and without irony, remarked, "Cool." Karen's power had always thrived on isolation, her gaze rendering each neighbor alone in their compliance. Now, conversations sparked like firecrackers, cracking the ice of solitude. But power rarely relinquishes itself without a final struggle. Karen filed a formal petition for compliance with the HOA board, a thick document brimming with italics and boldface. She cited dozens of subsections, attaching photographs as evidence. She wielded the phrase precedent of non-enforcement like a curse, demanding an emergency session to preserve the integrity of Brookside Lane. The board, stunned by the sudden attention and the surge of emails, reluctantly agreed. On the night of the session, the hall was not filled with the usual bored crowd of gardeners and retired rule followers, but with nearly the entire street. Some arrived to support Marcus, some to witness a spectacle, and others, for the first time in years, sensed that change might be within reach. The board members, lined up at a fold-out table, wore expressions of incredulous anticipation, having expected to mediate trivial disputes but finding themselves in a charged drama. Karen began with her legal arsenal, flipping through pages, quoting dates, stabbing the air with her pen. "If we do not enforce," she insisted, "we endorse defiance. Today it's a flag. Tomorrow it's a rusting car on bricks, holiday lights in January, tacky inflatables at Halloween. Standards exist for a reason. Without them, we are not a neighborhood, we are chaos." A murmur swept through the crowd, wearied and skeptical. It wasn't that they disliked standards, they despised being coerced into fear. When invited, Marcus rose to speak. He carried no documents. "I have no wish to disrupt anything. Neither your rules nor our peace. I moved here with the hope that this would be a place where kindness could flourish. That flag is not a challenge. It represents the names of men who never returned home. If your rules do not allow for that memory, then your rules need to change." He sat, and the silence that followed was not empty. It brimmed with consideration, relief, and a long-denied permission to simply be human. A woman at the back raised her hand, recounting her father's uniform, folded in a drawer. A man shared how Karen's strictness had brought his wife to tears over a paint color deemed too cheerful. A teenager admitted he had nearly been fined for parking incorrectly, only to rush his grandmother inside after she had fallen. No one shouted. They merely unveiled their truths. The board did what boards do. They called for calm, promised to review, and repeated the word process until it felt weighty and sacred. But those present could sense a shift. Karen felt it most acutely. Control is a feeling long before it becomes reality, and she sensed it ebbing away, much like the retreating tide. That night, Brookside Lane buzzed with life. Conversations echoed, laughter punctured the air. On porches and beneath warm lights, neighbors lingered and shared stories, not out of grievance, but out of recognition. The mother with the exuberant fairy lights asked the elderly man about his hedge, while the teenager offered to help the baker down the street with her crates. Small, everyday acts of kindness. Yet where fear had once taken residence, camaraderie was now moving in. From her window, Karen mistook their laughter for plotting. She told herself they were gossiping about her, and perhaps they were, but there was something else at play, a vibrant energy that wasn't aimed at her at all. Community, once molded by her stringent rules, was beginning to shape itself anew. Unable to endure the sight, Karen resorted to an old tactic, door-knocking, disguised as seeking consultation. Her smile felt strained. "Do you support standards?" she inquired, careful to frame her words in a way that had previously served her. Some nodded in agreement, of course, but others replied, "Standards, yes. Fear, no." A few remained silent, which spoke volumes. The clipboard weighed heavier with each doorstep she approached, finally becoming an anchor by the time she reached Marcus's house. He met her at the path, and for a moment, they stood separated by grass and the weight of years. Karen's expression bore the fatigue of someone fighting to conceal her exhaustion. "You've turned them against me," she murmured, not with malice, but as if stating a fact. "I haven't turned anyone," Marcus replied, his voice steady. They turned towards one another. "What about the rules?" she asked, almost pleadingly, and in that moment, Marcus saw her as he hadn't before. Beneath the rigid lines and citations lay a woman whose identity had been forged by the only constant in her life: order. "Rules should serve people," he said gently, "not the other way around." Without another word, she departed. The flag fluttered as she passed, a soft whisper of fabric in the air, reminiscent of a patient breath. By the end of the week, the board announced what many had anticipated. A vote to decide the future of the association's leadership would take place. The notice carefully omitted Karen's name, yet it was unneeded. The hall would open again on Thursday. Ballots would be cast, and the neighborhood would choose not just a president, but the kind of quiet they desired, the quiet born of obedience or one rooted in respect. On the day of the vote, as always, Marcus raised the flag. He gazed upward, contemplating deserts, mountains, and 100 mornings when raising it meant risking its fall. He thought of pies left on porches, tender notes penned in careful cursive, children chalking squares on the pavement without fear of rebuke. He did not crave victory. He yearned for a street where the sound of a neighbor's door opening did not signal impending reprimand. Across the way, Karen stood at her window, holding the last letter she had drafted but never sent. The words within were couched in the strict language she had always relied upon, yet they felt like a costume that no longer fit. The paper trembled in her grip. She did not know how to exist outside the strict confines of her clipboard. Outside, the lane breathed, unremarkable yet precious. For a fleeting moment, she imagined stepping into it without armor, the thought chilling her more than the prospect of defeat. As evening approached, the hall filled with the anticipation suburbia so rarely experienced. Not the suspense of danger, no sirens, no flashing lights, but the quiet kind, where a community collectively held its breath, pondering who it wished to become. Marcus tightened the halyard and tied it off, the knot holding firm. He went inside to change his shirt. The street inhaled, a flag rising once, twice, then settling into place, waiting. On the serene Brookside Lane, where the sun painted the streets in golden hues and laughter danced through the air, Karen Rowland had always believed that her meticulous nature was a gift. She envisioned order as the lifeblood of the community, a gentle hand guiding its residents away from chaos. Yet as she peered through her window one fateful evening, the laughter she heard outside felt like a foreign song, a melody of freedom that echoed deeper than her carefully manicured lawns and neatly hidden bins. It was as if the street itself was rejecting her gift, like a body spitting out a transplant. The air was thick with tension as the emergency vote loomed on the horizon. Notices fluttered on doors like anxious butterflies, conversations thrummed on every driveway, and the very essence of the community buzzed with a nervous energy. This meeting would no longer be about the flag that Marcus proudly raised each day. It had morphed into a personal battle, a referendum on Karen herself. Nights turned into restless voids as Karen sat at her kitchen table, the solitary light casting shadows on her cluttered papers. Her clipboard, once a symbol of her authority, now felt heavy, almost burdensome in her hands. She penned arguments, bullet points, entire speeches that echoed in the silence of her home. "Without standards, we are nothing," she whispered into the oppressive dark. But deep within her, an unsettling truth gnawed at her conscience. Was she truly fighting for the community, or merely for her own validation? Meanwhile, Marcus carried on with his steady routine, a calm amidst the brewing storm. Each morning he raised the flag, its fabric snapping in the wind like a proud warrior, and each evening he folded it with reverence. When neighbors quizzed him about the impending vote, his answers remained disarmingly tranquil. "It's for the street to decide." His silence and acceptance stirred something within Karen, a mixture of dread and admiration. For rage was a foe she could confront, but his quiet resolve eluded her. 2 nights before the vote, desperation clawed at Karen. Clipboard clutched tightly, she ventured door to door, her forced smile masking the storm within. She spoke passionately of duty and the essential nature of standards, but each response felt like a dagger to her heart. "We like things more relaxed now," one neighbor said, their eyes devoid of regret. Another remarked bluntly, "We're tired of being afraid." By the time she returned home, her smile had shattered, and the weight of her solitude pressed heavily on her chest. The day of the vote dawned, and the community hall buzzed with an energy that felt electric. Folding chairs scraped against the wooden floor as neighbors filled every inch of space, murmurs rippling like a tide. Karen's heart raced as she stood at the front, dressed sharply in a crisp blazer, her clipboard gleaming under the harsh lights. With a voice that initially rang with confidence, she declared, "For years I have served this community. I have maintained its standards, protected its beauty, and upheld the rules that keep us safe from decline. Without rules, we invite chaos." Yet as her words hung in the air, the applause that followed was sparse, a mere echo of what she had hoped for. It was then that Marcus rose, an unassuming figure who commanded the room without fuss. "With respect," he began, his voice steady. "Communities are not built on fear. They are built on trust and kindness. That flag is not chaos. It is memory, sacrifice." His words resonated, each syllable a gentle rebuke to Karen's fervor. Applause erupted, powerful and unwavering, rolling through the hall like thunder. Karen's heart plummeted as she slammed her clipboard against the table, desperation spilling over. "You are being manipulated," she shouted. But her plea fell flat against the tide of support for Marcus. As ballots were cast and the results read, the air crackled with suspense, and the finality of the count crashed down upon her. Karen was suspended from her role as HOA president. Gasps filled the room, followed by a wave of applause, some neighbors embracing, others simply exhaling as if they had released years of pent-up frustration. Karen stood, her face ashen, whispering, "You'll regret this." The words devoid of power as she gathered her papers, retreating into the night with a finality that echoed like the end of a reign. Marcus, however, did not celebrate. He acknowledged the smiles and nods of his neighbors with quiet humility, his thoughts swirling not with victory, but with a sense of responsibility. He sensed the weight of what had transpired. Karen's story was far from over, and people like her rarely stepped aside without leaving scars. In the days that followed, Karen retreated into her house, blinds drawn tight, her presence reduced to whispers and glances. Rumors of her bitter phone calls and legal manuals spread like wildfire, and Marcus felt the tension shift, the air thickening with the promise of conflict yet again. The war was not over. It had merely changed fronts, and the street, though temporarily relieved, braced itself for whatever storm Karen would unleash next. The suspense lingered, heavy and suffocating, like the calm before a tempest. In the heart of Brookside Lane, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and lavender, a stark contrast to the tension brewing within one of its homes. Inside, Karen Rowland sat in a dimly lit room, curtains drawn tight, her thoughts a whirlwind of anger and disbelief. The vote that had suspended her from the HOA presidency should have marked the end of her reign, an end that her neighbors celebrated with laughter and ease. But within the confines of her house, the storm was only beginning to brew. For over a decade, Karen had woven her identity into the fabric of authority. Each meticulously trimmed hedge, every approved curtain color, and all rubbish bins hidden from sight were her trophies. To lose her title felt like losing a part of herself, a visceral wound that she could not bear. She was not just the president. She embodied the very essence of order on Brookside Lane. As children played freely in the streets and neighbors shared cheerful banter, Karen's fury simmered. She turned her anger into action, transforming her home office into a war room. Armed with legal jargon sourced from council websites, she drafted letters filled with outrage, her rage tightly packaged in sterile prose. She called helplines with rehearsed complaints about imaginary noise violations and unruly lawns, each call a futile attempt to reclaim her lost power. When she launched an online petition warning of the inevitable decline of the neighborhood should Marcus, her rival, remain unhindered, it was met with ridicule rather than fear. Neighbors who once flinched at her notices now found amusement in her descent into desperation. Children gleefully turned her leaflets into paper airplanes, while one household mockingly pinned her warnings to their wheelie bin, scrawled with a message that read, "Where this belongs." The very authority she had wielded now crumbled under the sheer weight of their laughter. In stark contrast, Marcus remained undeterred. Each day he performed his rituals with quiet dignity, the flag rising at dawn, then folding it with care at dusk. He accepted no arguments, exuding an air of patience cultivated from experiences in harsher landscapes. His silence became an unbearable burden for Karen, who yearned for confrontation, but received only calmness in return. Then came that fateful Friday evening, vibrant with laughter and the smell of barbecues wafting through the air. With a soft cardigan draped over her shoulders and her hair loosened, Karen stepped outside, a stark departure from her usual armor of blazers and heels. Neighbors glanced her way, phones poised to capture the moment. She approached Marcus's gate, her heart pounding, and asked softly, "May we talk?" To her surprise, he nodded. "We can talk." In this moment of vulnerability, Karen took a step closer. "I have been severe," she confessed. "But you must understand, I have dedicated years to keeping this street perfect. Standards matter. Without them, things fall apart." Marcus folded his arms, his expression unreadable. "Order isn't the same as community." Her smile faltered, but her resolve remained. "Perhaps, but had you compromised, we might not have come to this. A smaller flag, perhaps, or placed at the back. Meeting me halfway would have saved us all this drama." "There is no compromise with memory. Either you honor it or you don't," Marcus replied, his voice steady, echoing across the now silent gardens. Karen's patience frayed and she hissed, "You think you've won, but you've only opened the door to chaos. Without rules, this street will unravel." "Rules without kindness unravel faster," Marcus countered, his calmness infuriating her. Turning on her heel, Karen strode away, the whispers of neighbors trailing behind her like shadows. "She hasn't changed," they murmured, as the footage of her failed attempt at peace circulated online, captions mocking her every word. Back in her dimly lit house, Karen paced like a caged animal, replaying Marcus's words, twisting them until they stung like bitter insults. She felt humiliated, not just by his defiance but by the laughter of her neighbors echoing in her ears. She needed to strike back. A new wave of leaflets emerged from her home, the language now more dramatic. Warning of neighborhood decline, loss of property value, and dangerous precedents. She delivered them door to door, hands trembling with anxiety. Yet the response was not fear, it was more ridicule. One man taped his leaflet to his bin, writing, "Finally something useful," while children turned theirs into origami birds. A woman even left hers on Marcus's porch with a note, "Thought you'd like to see the nonsense." Each rejection cut deeper, despair tightening its grip around her. She resorted to calling local newspapers, spinning her narrative as a martyr, a lone defender of order. Yet when a reporter came to hear her story, it was Marcus's calm demeanor that reshaped the article. The headline read, "Veterans Flag Sparks Debate Over HOA Power," with the comments online mercilessly mocking her. As Marcus became a symbol of resistance, the community rallied around him. People took to saluting the flag as they drove by, leaving tokens of gratitude on his porch. A heartfelt note read, "My husband's name is carved on a memorial. Thank you for remembering." Each act of kindness humbled him, reinforcing his resolve. Meanwhile, Karen's authority eroded away, her calls to the council unanswered, her letters returned unopened. Allies who once supported her now averted their gazes. She was no longer a figure of respect. She had become the neighborhood joke. Yet, she refused to let go. Night after night, she sat at her dining table, legal books piled around her, drafting potential lawsuits with titles like Action for Community Integrity. She rehearsed speeches before the mirror, her voice hoarse from the repeated declarations of her cause, knowing deep down that she was not just fighting for standards, she was fighting for herself. One evening, as the sun dipped lower, Marcus sat on his porch, bathed in the golden glow of dusk. A young father approached with his child on his shoulders, simply stating, "We're with you, whatever she tries next." Marcus nodded, understanding that this conflict had grown larger than himself. It now belonged to the entire street, who had tasted freedom and would not return to silence. Across the road, Karen stood behind her curtain, staring at the defiant flag, glowing faintly. The clipboard that once signified her power lay abandoned on the floor. Yet the imaginary power she clutched in her clenched fists was impossible to relinquish. "This isn't over," she whispered into the empty room. And though the neighbors relaxed into a newfound peace, and Marcus continued his quiet routine, the tension in Brookside Lane hung heavy in the air. The quiet was not peace. It was anticipation, a prelude to her next move that would decide not just a flag, but the very essence of the community they would become. In the quaint community of Brookside Lane, change was in the air, but not everyone was ready to embrace it. The sun cast a golden hue over neatly trimmed lawns and friendly picket fences, yet tension simmered beneath the surface, a remnant of the recent vote that had stripped Karen Rowland of her title as the unofficial ruler of the street. For most of her neighbors, the drama felt like a distant memory. They lingered longer in their gardens, laughter echoing through the warm evenings, while children chalked the pavements with carefree abandon. But Marcus, with his quiet demeanor and steadfast spirit, sensed that for Karen, the battle was far from over. Inside her home, the atmosphere was heavy with the scent of faded paper and ink. Karen's living room resembled a war room. Stacks of binders and legal tomes cluttered the floor, their spines cracked from long hours of furious study. The dining table, once a gleaming centerpiece for family gatherings, was now buried under an avalanche of drafts and notes. Her fingers ached from scribbling, and her voice, usually sharp and commanding, trembled with frustration as she muttered, "Loss of community standards, erosion of authority, dangerous precedents." Each word was a sharpened arrow aimed at the calm that Marcus exuded. But her threats fell flat, met with bemusement rather than fear. Neighbors read her fresh leaflets, which claimed Marcus endangered property values and heralded chaos. One teenager transformed her warning into a playful paper mask for Halloween, while a mother tucked hers under a coffee cup, chuckling, She's at it again. What once commanded obedience now inspired mockery, deepening Karen's bitterness. As the days turned into weeks, her world shrank. She stopped waving at passers-by, abandoning the pretense of friendliness. She retreated into the shadows of her house, her plans whispered to the walls that now felt like her only allies. Meanwhile, Marcus maintained his quiet strength. Each day, he mowed his lawn, helped an elderly neighbor carry groceries, and fixed a broken fence for the family 2 doors down. Every morning, he raised the flag, its fabric snapping gently in the dawn air, a symbol of unyielding hope. Yet to Karen, his calm felt like defeat, a bitter pill she couldn't swallow. 2 weeks after the vote, desperation crept in, leading her to launch what she believed would be her masterstroke. She reached out to a solicitor, an old acquaintance from a past life. Emphasizing community preservation, she presented him with photographs, bylaws, and letters she had written. The solicitor, weary but intrigued, filed a notice of potential legal action against Marcus. When Marcus received the thick envelope, he read it with a measured calm. The familiar weight of Karen's threats, now cloaked in legal jargon, sat in his drawer among previous notices. With a deep breath, he placed it neatly on top, closed the drawer, and went outside to tend to his garden, unfazed by the storm brewing. News of the legal notice spread swiftly. Some neighbors expressed concern. "What if she actually sues?" they whispered, their worry palpable. Yet Marcus remained calm, replying simply, "Papers don't make truth. We'll see." His tranquility unnerved Karen more than any threat could. She longed for him to be rattled, angry, confrontational, but he continued his routine, mowing, waving, raising his flag, embodying strength in silence. Frustration spurred her to escalate her campaign. Armed with a clipboard, she knocked on doors, demanding, "Do you want this street to fall apart? Chaos, noise, ugly decorations? Without rules, that's what you'll get." But instead of nodding in agreement, neighbors stood taller, voices rising in unity. "We want kindness, Karen," one declared firmly. Another shut the door, a third laughed. "Chaos? We're happier now than we've been in years." Her grip on power had not only slipped, it had vanished. Then came the night that would echo through Brookside Lane. Late autumn's chill racked around the trees, rattling dry leaves as families settled in for the evening. Marcus sat on his porch, a soft glow from the lamp casting gentle light on the pages of his book. Meanwhile, Karen's light burned brightly across the street, her shadow pacing, determination etched across her features. Minutes passed, and with a creak, her front door opened. With a stepladder in one hand and her clipboard in the other, she crossed the street with a fierce purpose. Neighbors peered from behind curtains, sensing the electricity in the air. Marcus stood slowly, setting his book aside, a calm figure against her storm. At the flagpole, Karen unfolded the stepladder, the metallic scrape cutting through the night like a battle cry. "Karen," Marcus called, his voice steady, "don't." But she climbed higher, clipboard banging against her side, hands trembling but resolute as she reached for the rope. Gasps erupted from the crowd watching from porches and windows. A murmur spread. "She's really doing it." With a voice that cracked, Karen shouted, "This is against the rules. If no one else will enforce them, I will." She yanked at the halyard, the flag jerking downward. Marcus stepped closer, but remained calm, watching her intently. "That cloth carries names," he said quietly. "Men who never came home. Do you want to rip them down too?" Her hands faltered, glancing around at the neighbors who had once bowed to her authority, now standing united against her. "I will not be mocked in my own street," Karen hissed, tugging harder. The flag slipped down further, brushing against her face, but Marcus's presence anchored her. "You already are, Karen. Not because of the flag, because of fear. And fear is finished here." His words struck harder than any shove, shaking her resolve. The ladder trembled beneath her as she hesitated. The clipboard fell, clattering to the ground, and the flag, caught halfway, fluttered as if caught in its own indecision. The neighbors surged forward, not to attack, but to support Marcus. Their faces illuminated by porch lights and phone screens. Karen froze, suspended between her past power and an uncertain future. Slowly, she climbed down, movements jerky, picking up her clipboard and hugging it to her chest. "You'll regret this," she whispered, retreating back to her house, a figure of defeat in the dim light. The flag lifted again in the breeze, settling proudly above Marcus's porch, a symbol of unity, resilience, and change. The street exhaled, but no one believed it was truly finished yet. On Brookside Lane, the air had thickened with the remnants of yesterday's chaos. As the sun rose, its soft light poured through the curtains of Karen's living room, illuminating the shadows of her defeat. The incident with the flag had ignited a spark that crackled with tension. Each replay of the video in her mind felt like a steel wedge driving deeper into her authority. Her face twisted in anger. The image had been splashed across group chats and neighborhood boards, turning her once respected presence into a subject of cruel mockery. Karen's retreat into the sanctuary of her home didn't bring solace. Instead, it deepened her isolation. With every hour that ticked by, the laughter of her neighbors drifted through her walls, a haunting melody that reminded her of the camaraderie she had once commanded. She clutched her clipboard like a lifeline, making calls to the council, scrawling letters that pleaded for acknowledgement, all while the very streets she patrolled began to hum with a different kind of life, a life she had tried to stifle. Meanwhile, Marcus was a steady pulse on the lane. His quiet determination resonated like the steady rise and fall of the flag he tended to every morning. Where there had once been fear, he now infused the neighborhood with a sense of dignity and respect. The residents who had once cowered behind their curtains were now gathering openly, exchanging warm meals and laughter, as though the walls of fear had finally crumbled. The culmination of this silent conflict happened one fateful morning, as Marcus stepped outside, the morning dew still glistening on the grass. There, at her gate, stood Karen, bare feet pressed against the cool earth. The absence of her clipboard marked a profound shift. Her shoulders sagged under the weight of her surrender. "I only wanted them to listen," she murmured, her voice cracking like the fragile silence between them. Marcus met her gaze with compassion. "They might have, if you'd listened first." His words hung in the air, a soft echo of truth. With a heavy heart, Karen turned back to her house, the curtains drawing closed behind her, like a final curtain call of a tragic play. Weeks later, a stark for sale sign stood sentinel in her yard, marking her departure from a community she once ruled with an iron grip. She left without fanfare, without a farewell to the neighbors who had once bowed under her gaze. Only silence remained. Brookside Lane began to breathe anew. The neighbors, once strangers, now lingered on porches and shared secrets over fences, their spirits woven together in threads of kindness. The neighborhood board, recognizing the shift, softened its tone, allowing rules to be enforced with empathy rather than fear. Together, they discovered the beauty of living as a community, not just as individuals. And as for Marcus, his routine remained untouched. Each morning, the flag rose high, and every evening, he folded it with reverence. Yet this time, he was not alone. He was embraced by a collective spirit, a street that had chosen memory over intimidation, unity over control. On the anniversary of his arrival, the neighbors gathered spontaneously, their laughter filling the air like music. They shared food under the golden hues of the setting sun. When Marcus raised the flag that evening, a ripple of applause erupted, not just for the flag, and not solely for Marcus, but for the community they had reclaimed together. Taryn's empty house stood as a testament to the power of fear and the resilience of unity. As the camera lingered on the flag, fluttering gently in the twilight, it panned around to capture the joy of children playing, neighbors exchanging smiles. Finally, a family forged in the fire of their shared struggles. And just before the screen faded to black, a voice resonated, wrapping the narrative in a poignant reminder. This was never just a fight over a flag. It was a fight over what kind of community we choose to be. One built on fear, or one built on respect. Brookside Lane made its choice. What about yours?